The frost came early to Millbrook that year, and it came the way frost comes to places no one important visits, quiet, without ceremony, silvering the hedges before the sun was up to see it. Wood smoke hung low over the cottages, wet wool, tallow and cold stone. The lane past the mill smelled of all three, and under them, faint, the green smell of the river deciding whether to freeze. She was the kind of woman a room forgot the moment she left it. Iris Bellamy was 25, and she had her father's hands before she had anything else of him, broad through the knuckle, quick with a needle or a nail, hands that had mended more roofs and harnesses in Millbrook than any man's in the parish, and been paid for perhaps a third of them. She was not pretty in the way the vicar's daughters were pretty. She was upright in the way a fence post is upright, because it has learned there is no other way to stand. The bridge below the mill was going soft at the North Pier. She had told the miller. She had told the parish council. She had told the men who drank at the Swan, and laughed, and told her that mending was a woman's trade, and bridges were not. No one had gone to look. She went anyway, most evenings, and pressed her thumb into the mortar to feel how far the rot had travelled, because someone in Millbrook was going to fall through that bridge before the year turned, and she did not intend for it to be a child. Tonight the house under the bridge was going to hear one more thing before the frost finished settling. It was not a house. It was 2 boards and a strip of old sailcloth, and a boy lived under it, when he lived anywhere at all. That is what this is about. Before we go further, I want to ask you for something small. If stories like this one, about ordinary people who are decent when nobody important is watching, are the kind of thing you want to keep finding, take a moment now and subscribe to the channel. It costs you nothing, and it means I get to keep telling you these stories. Thank you. Now, back to Millbrook, and the boy under the bridge, and the woman who did not know yet that she was being watched. His name was Tam. Nobody had ever given him a surname, or if they had, it had been lost along with whoever might have used it. He was perhaps 9. He blacked boots outside the coaching inn when the ostler let him, and slept under the bridge when the inn's back room was full of men who kicked. Iris had known him 11 months, since the spring, since she had found him with a fever and no one to sit with him, and had sat with him 3 nights running, because there was no one else who would. She came to the bridge that evening the way she came most evenings, with a twist of bread in her apron pocket, and a strip of flannel for his hands, which were cracked from the cold the way a poor child's hands crack, deep, at the knuckle, bleeding a little when he made a fist. She did not knock. There was nothing to knock on. She said his name once, low, the way you call a thing that startles easily, and he came out from under the sailcloth, with his shoulders already up around his ears, the way he always came, ready to be told to move along. She did not tell him to move along. She sat on the flat stone that had been her seat all 11 months, and unwrapped the bread, and did not hand it to him directly. She set it on the stone between them, because she had learned, slowly, the way you learn a shy animal, that Tam took things better when they were not pressed on him. He ate without looking at her. That was also usual. What was not usual was the coat. She had brought her father's old coat, the one she had kept 4 years past his death, because she could not bring herself to sell wool that still, faintly, smelled of him. She had told herself for 4 years that she was saving it for nothing. Tonight she took it out of the bundle under her arm, and held it out, and said nothing at all, because there was nothing to say that would not embarrass them both. Tam looked at the coat for a long moment. He did not reach for it. "I've nothing to give you for it," he said. "I did not ask for anything. Everyone wants something. Then I am not everyone." She set the coat on the stone beside the bread. "Wear it or don't. It does no good folded." He put it on. It swallowed him at the shoulders, the sleeves hanging past his hands, and something in his face did a thing she had not seen it do before, a kind of loosening, quick, gone almost before it arrived. He did not thank her. She would have been embarrassed if he had. She checked his hands instead, turned them over in the last of the light, wound the flannel around the worst of the cracks, and told him, the way she told him every week, that he should come up to the village and let old Mrs. Aldous look at that cough before it settled in his chest. He would not come. He never came. She had stopped expecting it and kept offering anyway, because that too was a kind of mending, offering the thing you know will be refused, so that it is there to be taken up later if the refusal ever wears thin. She did not see the rider on the road above the bridge, where the hedge broke for the gate into the home pasture. He had stopped his horse there some minutes before, on his way in from a journey no one in the house was expecting him back from for another week, and he had meant only to water the animal at the ford and go on. He had not meant to sit there in the cold with his collar up, watching a woman in a mended shawl give away a dead man's coat to a boy who had nothing to give her back. He was not in the habit of watching strangers. He told himself, after, that it was the strangeness of the scene that had held him. A bridge, a beggar boy, a woman kneeling in the frost as though the cold did not touch her. That was not quite true, and he knew it was not quite true, even as he told himself the lie. What had held him was simpler. She had not looked around first. She had not looked to see who might be watching before she knelt down in the mud in her one good shawl. There had been no one to perform for, and she had not performed. She did not know then that the man on the grey horse, watching from the dark of the hedge with his collar turned up against the wind, was Alden Vance, Duke of Calderley, come home a week early to a house he had been dreading, and that before the winter was finished he would know the shape of her hands better than he knew his own name. She gathered her empty basket and told Tam she would come Thursday, and walked back up the lane toward the village with her shawl pulled tight, and did not look back, because there was nothing behind her she expected to need looking at. The rider did not follow her. He sat a while longer at the ford, and then he turned his horse toward the house on the hill, where 2 children he had not seen in 6 weeks were waiting for a father they had stopped, in small ways, expecting to come home at all. Calder Hall sat above Millbrook the way a held breath sits in a chest, present, felt, rarely let out. It had been a grieving house for 2 years, since the fever that took the Duchess in a single terrible week the spring after their daughter was born, and it had not yet learned to be anything else. The nursery fires were kept high because the housekeeper, Mrs. Pruitt, had decided early on that warmth was the one thing she could give the children without asking anyone's leave, and she gave it without stinting. Alden did not go up to the nursery that first night. He told himself the children would be asleep, which was true, and that there would be time in the morning, which was also true, and neither reason was the real one. The real reason sat somewhere under his collarbone and would not be looked at directly. He had ridden past a woman kneeling in the mud, and something in him that had been shut for 2 years had opened a crack, uninvited, and he did not yet know what to do with the draught coming through it. He asked Mrs. Pruitt, over a cold supper he barely touched, who tended the Millbridge cottages, and she told him, without being asked why he wanted to know, that Bellamy's daughter had the best hands in the parish and the worst luck, her father dead 4 years, no brother, no dowry, taking in mending, because no one would hire a woman to do a man's work even when she did it better. She feeds the bridge boy, Mrs., Pruitt added, watching him over the rim of her own cup, because Mrs. Pruitt had run this house for 11 years and missed very little. Has done since the spring. No one asked her to. Does anyone thank her for it? No one knows to. She'd be mortified if they did. Mrs. Pruitt set down her cup. Why do you ask, Your Grace? He did not answer that honestly, not that night. He said something about the state of the tenant cottages, which was true enough as far as it went, and Mrs. Pruitt, who had known him since he was a boy too grave for his own good, let it go, because she had also learned, in 11 years, which of his silences were worth pressing, and which were better left to finish their own thinking. He went up to the nursery before he went to bed, after all. Rowan was 7, and slept with his fists curled the way his mother used to sleep. Clara was 4, and slept sprawled, as though sleep were something she had fallen into rather than entered. He stood in the doorway a long while, and did not wake either of them, and went to his own cold room, thinking of a woman kneeling in the frost with a dead man's coat in her hands, asking for nothing. She was going to need watching, he told himself. Quietly, carefully, not the watching of a man who intends to be seen watching. He had learned enough, in 2 years of grief, and in a lifetime before it of relatives who smiled at his face and cut at his back, to know that the only test that ever told the truth was the one the person being tested did not know she was sitting. He did not know yet what he meant to do with what he found. He knew only that he meant to find it. By morning he had sent his steward, a careful man named Farrow, who had served the estate longer than Alden had held the title, down to the Bridge cottages with an order that no name be attached to it. The roof of the Bellamy cottage was to be seen to before the frost worsened, and the account was to be settled with the estate, and never mentioned to the tenant as coming from the house. Farrow had asked no questions. He had learned over the years that the Duke's quiet charities were not to be questioned, only carried out. He sent, too, for word to be had with the innkeeper about the boy who blacked boots and slept under the bridge, that the boy be given a place in the stable yard, warm quarters, food and work suited to his age, and that nothing be said of who had arranged it. The innkeeper, glad of cheap and willing labour and gladder still of the coin that came with it, asked no questions either. It was, Alden told himself, only decency. Any man of conscience with the means would do the same. He did not examine too closely why this particular decency had arrived within a day of watching a particular woman kneel in the mud, because to examine it was to admit something he was not yet ready to admit even to himself, that he had been moved, not by pity for the boy, but by the woman who had knelt for him with no one there to see it. Iris heard of the roof from the thatcher, who arrived unannounced on Thursday morning, and told her only that the account had been settled and he had his orders, and would she mind stepping clear while he worked. She stood in the lane in the cold with her arms crossed, and asked him 3 times who had sent him, and 3 times he told her he did not know, only that the estate had paid, and estates did not explain themselves to thatchers. She did not like it. She stood a long while after he had climbed up, watching him work, turning the puzzle of it, over the way she turned over a difficult seam, looking for where the thread had started. She could think of no one who owed her a roof. She had asked no one for one. It sat wrong in her chest, a debt she had not agreed to and could not repay, and when the thatcher finished and packed his tools and would take no coin from her because, he said again, the account was settled, she went inside and sat by her small fire and did not feel grateful. She felt watched. She was right to feel it, though she did not yet know by whom, or why, or that the watching had begun with an act of hers she had believed no one had seen at all. Tam did not come to the bridge that Thursday. She went down with her basket at the usual hour, and found the boards and the sailcloth still there, but no boy, and for a long, cold moment she thought the worst, the way you think the worst about anyone, with so little between them and harm. She asked at the inn, working her way up her nerve to knock at the kitchen door and ask a question she had no standing to ask, and the innkeeper's wife told her, with some surprise that she hadn't already heard, that the boy had been taken into the stable yard, given a bed over the tack room and regular meals, and was, by the look of him, eating like he meant to make up for every meal he'd missed in 9 years. "Who arranged it?" Iris asked. The innkeeper's wife shrugged, the particular shrug of a woman who has decided not to look a gift too closely in the mouth. "Come down from the house," I heard. Somebody at Calder Hall took a notion. Iris walked back up the lane with her basket empty and her thoughts full, turning the roof and the boy over together now, wondering if they were the same hand, and telling herself, because it was easier than the alternative, that they could not possibly have anything to do with her. Great houses did such things sometimes. It meant nothing. She did not know then that the man who had arranged both was, at that very hour, standing at his study window with a letter from his sister-in-law unopened on the desk behind him, watching the lane below the hedge where he had first seen her, and thinking, against every instinct of caution built up over 2 grieving years, that he wanted, very badly, to know her name properly, and to hear her say something plain, and to see whether the woman who knelt in mud for a stranger's child was the same woman in a warm room with the fire lit and no cold to test her. He decided, that afternoon, on a small deception. Not a cruel one, he told himself, a necessary one. He would go down to the village as Mr. Vance, a land agent engaged by the estate, and see about hiring a woman of good character to help with the children, whose nurse had left in the autumn to care for her own mother and not yet returned. It was true enough that the position was open. It was true enough that a land agent might reasonably be sent to fill it. What was not true, what he told no one but Farrow, sworn to silence, was that the land agent and the Duke were the same man, and that he had already decided, before he had ever spoken a word to her, whose door he meant the agent to knock on first. The cottage at the edge of Millbrook, where Iris took in mending, had one good room and a lean-to kitchen, and it was in that one good room, 3 days later, that she received Mr. Vance, land agent to the Duke of Calderley, who came in out of the cold with snow on his shoulders, and introduced himself in a voice so quiet and level she had to lean forward to be sure she had heard him right. He was not what she expected of an agent. Agents she had known were brisk men, who counted a room's worth before they had finished crossing the threshold. This one stood a moment, just inside her door, as though the room itself required some consideration, and when he spoke it was without the condescension she had braced herself for. "Miss Bellamy, I understand you have some skill with children. I have skill with most things that need mending," she said. "Children included, I suppose, though I've none of my own to prove it by. The Duke's household requires a woman to sit with his children and see to their letters and their manners until a proper governess can be found. It is not a grand position. The pay is fair. The hours are long." He watched her with a steadiness that unsettled her more than any bluster would have. "I am told you fed a bridge boy through the winter and asked nothing for it. Anyone would have done the same. No, he said, they would not. She did not know what to make of that, and so she did not answer it, and the silence sat between them a moment, not uncomfortable exactly, but full, the way a held breath is full. Your Grace's household is a great deal grander than mine, she said finally. I've no training as a governess. I did not ask for a governess. I asked for someone the children would not be afraid of. He paused. There is a difference. She agreed, in the end, because the money was more than she had seen in a year, and because something in his flat, careful voice made her believe he meant what he said, and not some other thing underneath it, which was more than she could say for most men who had ever stood in her doorway. She did not know, walking up to Calder Hall 2 mornings later, with her one good dress brushed and her hair pinned tight, that the man who had hired her would be waiting there not as an agent inspecting his employer's choice, but as the employer himself, watching from behind a name that was not a lie so much as a door he had not yet opened. Rowan would not look at her the first morning. He sat at the schoolroom table with his arms crossed and his chin down, and answered every question with as few words as he could manage. The particular sullenness of a boy who has learned that people who come to sit with him tend to leave again. Clara, 4 and unburdened yet by that particular grief, climbed into Iris's lap within the hour, and stayed there through the whole of the reading lesson, sticky-fingered, and entirely unbothered by the fact that she was sitting on a stranger. Iris did not press Rowan. She had learned, with Tam, that pressing a shy thing only drove it further under its bridge. She let him sit with his arms crossed while she read to Clara, and she read well, in a voice that did not perform the reading so much as simply tell it, and by the 2nd day Rowan had uncrossed his arms, and by the 4th he had drifted, without seeming to notice he was doing it, to the edge of the rug nearest her chair. My mother used to read that one, he said on the 4th day, not looking up. Did she? Iris kept her voice even. The way you keep your voice even around any wound you have only just learned is there. Would you like me to read it differently, or the same? He considered this with the gravity of a much older person. The same, he said. But you can stop if you want to cry. I won't cry, she said. But thank you for telling me I could. He almost smiled at that. It was the first almost smile she had gotten out of him, and she carried the memory of it home that evening, the way she had once carried the memory of Tam's face loosening over the coat, a small warm coal held close against the cold. She saw little of Mr. Vance in those first weeks, and told herself she was glad of it, because there was something about him that unsettled the careful order she had built her life around, a man who watched more than he spoke and said, when he did speak, exactly what he meant and not one word more. She caught him, twice, standing in the schoolroom doorway, with an expression she could not read, gone before she could ask him what he wanted. She did not know that what he wanted, both times, was simply to watch her be patient with his son, in a way his own grief had not let him be, and that he left before she saw him because he did not trust his face to hide what watching it did to him. She learned, in scraps, the shape of the household's grief. Mrs. Pruitt told her, over tea in the kitchen on a slow afternoon, that the Duchess had died 2 years past, quick and cruel, a fever that took her in a week when Clara was barely a month old, and that his Grace had not been the same man since, closed up like a house with the shutters drawn, though he was kind to the staff and never cruel, only far away. He wasn't always so grave, Mrs. Pruitt said. There was a girl before the Duchess, Mind, a pretty thing with a laugh you could hear across a ballroom, and cruel as a whipping post underneath it. broke it off when she learned the old Duke's debts were worse than the title's worth, and married a baron with better prospects inside the 12-month. He doesn't speak of her, but I think it's why he's slow to trust a smiling face. Iris turned that over quietly and said nothing, but she thought of Mr. Vance's flat, careful voice, and understood a little better why a man might learn to hold himself so still. She began to notice, too, small things that did not add up in the way small things usually added up. The butcher's boy delivered twice what the household could reasonably eat, and the surplus went, unremarked, to the bridge cottages down the lane. A new blanket appeared in Tam's quarters over the tack room, thick and plain and unmarked, the same week the frost turned hardest. When she asked Mrs. Pruitt about it, the housekeeper only said that the estate looked after its own, and changed the subject with the particular briskness of a woman changing a subject on purpose, and Iris, who was not stupid, filed the briskness away with everything else she could not yet explain. She did not connect any of it to Mr. Vance. Why would she? He was an agent, brisk and careful and paid by the month, and dukes did not, in her experience, concern themselves with the blankets of stable boys. She was wrong about that, though it would be some weeks yet before she learned how wrong, and by then a great deal else would have happened first. The Duke's sister by marriage, Lady Cornelia Ashe, had never much cared for Calder Hall, and cared for it less now that her sister was 2 years dead, and the household ran, in her opinion, like a ship with no captain fit to steer it. She came for a fortnight in the deep of winter, ostensibly to see the children. In truth, to see whether the rumours reaching her in town, of a village woman brought in to sit with them, amounted to anything worth managing. She found Iris in the schoolroom on the second afternoon of her visit, reading to Clara, with Rowan curled at her side, and she stood in the doorway a long moment taking in the scene, with an expression that reminded Iris, unpleasantly, of the vicar's wife inspecting a basket of mending for floors. "You must be the woman from the village," Lady Cornelia said, when Iris rose. Her voice had a particular musical cruelty to it, pleasant on the surface, cutting underneath, the kind of voice trained in drawing-rooms to wound without ever raising itself. "Bellamy, is it? I understand your father mended fences." "He did, my lady, and roofs, and harness, and whatever else wanted mending." "How resourceful." Lady Cornelia's gaze travelled, deliberate and unhurried, from Iris's hands, reddened and scarred from years of honest work, to the hem of her one good dress, mended so many times the original cloth was barely visible beneath the patches. "And now you mend children. I wonder what qualifies a fence-mender's daughter for that particular trade. I've found children mend the same as anything else, my lady, patiently, and without pretending the tear was never there." Something flickered across Lady Cornelia's face, quick and unpleasant, the look of a woman unused to being answered plainly. "How quaint. I do hope you understand your position here is a temporary convenience, Miss Bellamy, and not a foothold. This house has standards. My sister kept them beautifully before she died. I should hate to see them slip, because His Grace, in his grief, has grown careless about who he allows near his children." Rowan's small hand had found Iris's during this speech, and tightened. She did not look down at him. She kept her eyes on Lady Cornelia, and she did not curtsy, and she did not flush, though something hot moved through her chest at the word careless. "I would never allow the children's standards to slip, my lady," she said. "I only teach them that kindness and good breeding aren't the same thing. There is a difference. I've found it useful to know which is which." The bell of Lady Cornelia's laugh rang out then, 3 practised beats, entirely without warmth. "How very philosophical," for a fence mender's daughter. She swept out without waiting for an answer, and it was only after she had gone that Iris allowed her hands to shake, briefly, before she folded them together and steadied them by will alone, because Rowan was watching, and because a woman who had learnt not to cry where it showed had also learnt not to shake where it showed either. She did not know that Alden had been standing in the corridor beyond the schoolroom door for the whole of the exchange, having come up to see the children and stopped short at the sound of his sister-in-law's voice, and that he had heard every word, including his own name attached to the word careless, and including the answer Iris had given without flinching. He did not go in. He stood a long moment in the cold corridor with his jaw set, and then he went to find Cornelia, and the conversation that followed behind his study door was short and quiet, and left his sister-in-law's face white with a fury she was too well bred to show anywhere it might be seen. He did not tell Iris of it, he only made certain, in the days that followed, that Lady Cornelia's fortnight ended a week early, called back to town on business he invented for the purpose, and that the schoolroom, after she left, breathed a little easier for her absence. Iris did not know that either. She only knew that the visit had shaken something loose in her that she had thought long settled, the old certainty of her own unfitness, and that it did not go quietly back to sleep merely because the woman who had woken it was gone. She began, in the weeks after Lady Cornelia's visit, to draw back from the children in small ways she told herself were sensible, and knew, underneath, was something closer to fear. She stopped staying past the appointed hour, even when Clara begged for one more story. She stopped letting Rowan walk beside her to the gate, though he had taken to doing it most evenings, chattering about whatever small thing had happened in his day. She told herself she was only being proper, a servant keeping to her place, and did not examine too closely why keeping to her place had suddenly become so urgent, though the truth of it was simple enough. Lady Cornelia had said aloud the thing Iris had always believed quietly about herself, that she did not belong in rooms with fine carpets, that her hands and her poverty and her plainness made her a convenience at best and an embarrassment at worst, and hearing it said had not taught her anything new. It had only confirmed what she had long suspected. Mr. Vance noticed the drawing back before anyone else did, because he had made a private habit over the weeks of watching the schoolroom door in the evenings to see her come and go, telling himself it was only his responsibility as the one who had hired her. He noticed that she no longer lingered. He noticed that Rowan's face, which had begun to open like a slow spring thaw, had shuttered again, and he understood, with the particular sick clarity of a man realizing he has let harm come to something he meant to protect, that his sister-in-law's fortnight had cost him more than a week of peace. He found Iris in the stable yard one evening, later than her usual hour, having stayed to see that Tam's blanket was aired properly, a small kindness she performed now as a habit and told no one of. Alden had come down on some pretext about the horses, and found himself, instead, standing a few feet from her in the cold, with the particular tongue-tied stillness of a man who has rehearsed 100 things to say, and finds none of them will come. "You've been leaving early," he said finally. "The children don't require me past the hour. Misty, Vance, Rowan disagrees." She looked at him then, and something in her plain, tired face made him wish, fiercely and uselessly, that he could tell her everything at once, who he was, what he had seen at the bridge, what his sister-in-law's cruelty had cost her that she did not deserve to pay. He said none of it. It was not yet time, and he knew it, and the knowing sat like a stone in his chest. "I am a hired woman, Miss Vance," Iris said quietly. I mend fences and I mend children when I am paid to, and I do it well, but I know the shape of my own place. Lady Cornelia was not wrong about that, whatever else she was. She was wrong about a great deal, Alden said, and his voice for once was not flat at all. More than you know. She did not ask him what he meant. She gathered her shawl and bid him good night, and walked home through the cold with her chin up, and if he had followed her, which he did not, though every instinct in him wanted to, he would have seen that she cried the last half-mile of the walk, quietly, where no one could see it, the one place she had ever permitted herself the indulgence. It was Mrs. Pruitt 3 weeks later, who finally set the crooked thing straight, though she did not mean to do it all at once. Iris had come to the kitchen on an errand for Clara, a lost ribbon that had turned up under a floorboard, and found the housekeeper sitting with her feet up and a rare hour to spare, and something in the quiet of the kitchen and the housekeeper's tired kindness loosened Iris's tongue in a way it rarely was. "I don't think I'm fit for this house," Iris said, before she had quite decided to say it. "Lady Cornelia isn't wrong. I've no birth, no dowry, nothing but a pair of hands good for mending. I don't know why His Grace keeps me on." Mrs. Pruitt looked at her a long moment, the look of a woman deciding whether a thing has gone on too long unsaid. "Do you know who paid to have your father's old roof mended, girl?" "The estate. The Thatcher said so. And do you know who told the innkeeper to take the bridge boy into his stable yard, and pays the difference between what a stable boy earns and what it costs to keep him fed and warm, quiet, every quarter, with no name on the account?" "I assumed it was the estate's charity." "It's His Grace's charity," Mrs. Pruitt said. "Has been for 2 years, more of it than you'd believe. Half the tenant cottages on this land patched up on his coin with no name attached, because he asked me, when I handle the accounts, never to let it be known where the money came from. He says a kindness with a name on it isn't a kindness, it's a bill." She watched Iris's face carefully. "He watched you feed that boy under the bridge before he ever hired an agent to hire you, Iris Bellamy, before Mr. Vance ever knocked on your door." The kitchen went very still. Iris set down the ribbon she had been holding, very carefully on the table, because her hands had begun to shake, and she did not trust herself to hold anything else. "Mr. Vance," she said slowly, "is not the agent." Mrs. Pruitt's face did something complicated, caught between the guilt of having said more than she was meant to, and the relief of finally having said it. "I've said too much. It isn't mine to tell the rest of. But I'll say this. Whatever you think His Grace sees when he looks at you, Iris, it isn't a fence-mender's daughter. It never was." Iris walked home that night in a fury of feeling she could not name, something that was not quite anger, and not quite hope, and not quite the particular shame of having been watched, tested, and found without ever being told the test was running. She thought of every plain word she had spoken to a land agent who was, it seemed, no land agent at all. Every moment she had let her guard down in front of a man who had known, the whole time, exactly who he was, and let her believe otherwise. She did not weep where anyone could see it. She sat by her small fire until it burned to embers and turned the whole of it over, roof and boy and blanket, and every quiet unmarked kindness, until the shape of it resolved into something she could no longer pretend not to see. She did not go up to the hall the next day. She sent word instead, through the boy who carried messages between the village and the house, that she was unwell, and would not be able to attend the children, and she sat in her cottage with the door barred against a cold that had nothing to do with the weather, trying to decide whether what she felt was betrayal or something else entirely, something with no name yet. That frightened her more than the anger did. The small library at Calder Hall was the warmest room in the house, kept so deliberately, because it was the one room the Duke used most, and the one Mrs. Pruitt was determined should never feel like the rest of the grieving house. A fire was always laid there by 4 in the afternoon, and it was there, 3 days after her message of illness, that Alden Vance, Duke of Calderley, received Iris Bellamy, who had come at last not because she was summoned, but because she had decided she would rather hear a lie confirmed to her face than let it sit any longer unspoken between them. He rose when she entered. He did not offer her a chair right away, and she did not sit. And for a long moment they only looked at each other across the space of the small warm room, the fire popping once, a coal settling, the only sound. "You knew," she said. "The whole time. Mr. Vance was never a land agent." "No," he said. "He was never that. You watched me at the bridge. Before any of it. Before the roof. Before the boy. Before you ever came to my door with a false name in your mouth." Yes, he did not look away from her, though it clearly cost him something to hold still under the weight of her eyes. "I was riding home a week early. I stopped to water my horse at the ford. I saw a woman give a dead man's coat to a boy who had nothing to give her in return, and ask nothing for it, and not once look around to see if anyone of consequence was watching her do it." His jaw worked once. "I have spent 2 years in a house full of people who smile at me because of what I can give them. I have a sister-in-law who measures every kindness by what it costs her to perform it. I wanted, for once in my life, to see what a person did when they believed no one who mattered could see them do it. That is the only test I have ever trusted to tell the truth. You passed it before I had ever spoken a word to you, and so you lied to me. I gave you a name that was not a lie so much as a door I had not yet opened," he said. "I know it does not feel like the difference it is. I am sorry for that. I should have told you sooner. I told myself I was protecting the children, protecting the household, protecting you from a title that changes how people speak to you before they've had the chance to learn who you are. All of that was true. None of it was the whole of the reason." He stopped, and something in his flat, careful voice finally cracked open, just slightly, just enough. "The whole of the reason is that I did not want to be a duke to you. I wanted, for as long as I could manage it, to be only a man you had not yet learned to be careful around." She stood very still, her hands folded tight in front of her, steady, though it cost her to keep them so. "You had Tam taken in. You mended my father's roof. You did all of it and told no one, and let me believe it was chance, or charity with no face attached. A kindness with a name on it isn't a kindness. It's a bill." He said it quietly, and she recognised with a small jolt Mrs. Pruitt's own words handed back to her, and understood they had come from him first. "I did not do it to be thanked. I did not do it to be found out. I did it because I saw what you did for a boy who could never repay you, and I could not stop myself from doing likewise, in whatever small ways were mine to do." "You tested me," she said. "Weeks of it. The schoolroom. The children. Lady Cornelia. I did not test you with Cornelia. That was cruelty I should have prevented sooner and did not." His voice roughened. "But yes, I watched you with Rowan, and with Clara, and I told myself I was only assuring myself of a good governess for my children. And that, too, was true, and not the whole of the truth. I watched you because I could not stop myself from watching you, Iris. I have not wanted to look at anything closely in 2 years. I wanted to look at you. The fire popped again. Somewhere in the house a clock struck the half-hour, faint through the walls. She did not answer him at once. She stood in the warm room with the cold of the last 3 days still in her bones, and let the silence stretch. Because she had learned long ago not to speak until she was certain of what she meant to say, and she was not yet certain, though something in her chest had begun, treacherously, to unclench. "I do not know what to do with a duke's regard," she said finally. "I know what to do with a land agent's. I do not know the shape of the other thing." "Then I will not ask you to know it tonight," Alden said. "I would rather have your honesty about that than a yes you did not mean." She left the library that evening without giving him an answer, and he let her go, though every part of him wanted to ask her to stay, because he had learned, in the watching, that the only kind of regard worth having from her was the kind she gave freely, in her own time, with no pressure bearing on it, and he meant to prove to her, in the weeks that followed, that he understood the difference. Word travels in a small house faster than anyone intends it to, and by the following week the whole of Calder Hall knew, in the particular hushed way servants know things before their masters mean them to, that his Grace had been calling on Miss Bellamy in the village of an evening, plainly, in his own name now, no agent's disguise about it, and that he came away from these visits looking, Mrs. Pruitt reported to the kitchen with some satisfaction, less like a shuttered house, and more like a man who had remembered how a fire was meant to feel. He came each time on foot, which the grooms thought peculiar for a duke with perfectly good horses, though none of them said so, because he came on foot for a reason he told only Iris, on the 3rd such evening, standing in her small cold cottage, with his hat in his hands like a much younger and much less certain man. "A horse announces a duke," he said. "A man on foot in the lane is only a man. You are still a duke, whatever you arrive on," she said, though there was, for the first time, something almost like warmth in the way she said it. "I am aware." He turned his hat once in his hands. "I have come to ask you something, and I find I do not know how to ask it in a way that does not sound like a command, because I have spent a great deal of my life giving commands, and very little of it asking for anything I was not certain of receiving. I am not certain of this." She waited. She had learned, across these weeks of careful visits, that he arrived at things slowly, and that rushing him only made him retreat further into the flat, careful voice she had first mistaken for coldness, and now understood as a kind of armour grown over an old wound. "I would like you to consider marrying me," he said. "Not tonight. Not because I have said it tonight. I would rather have your no freely given in the spring than your yes tonight, because you felt the weight of my asking, and did not know how to refuse a duke in his own library. I am not asking as a duke. I am asking as the man who watched you at the bridge, and has not stopped thinking of you since." She was quiet a long moment, turning something over, and when she spoke it, it was not the answer he had braced for, either the yes or the no. "I am not fit for any man," she said. "I have no dowry, no name worth having, hands ruined from work no lady's hands are meant to know. I have told myself that so many years I no longer know if it's true or only a habit I've worn smooth from handling. But I know the children. I know Rowan's silences and what they mean, and I know Clara doesn't yet understand her mother is gone and asks me, sometimes, when she's tired, if I will stay until she wakes. She looked at him then, steady, her chin up, her hands, for once not shaking at all. "I am not fit for any man, your grace, but I can love your children. That much I know how to do. If that is not enough, then I understand, and I will go on mending fences, and no harm done between us." He went very quiet. It was not the quiet of a man displeased. It was the particular stillness of a man who has been struck somewhere he did not know was still tender, and needs a moment before he trusts his voice to hold. The fire in the small grate cracked once. Outside, distant, a rook called, a single flat note in the cold dark. "You misunderstand me," he said finally low. "I am not asking you to be fit for a man, Iris. I have had a wife who was born to every fitness this house could name, and I loved her, and I grieved her, and none of that fitness kept the fever from taking her in a week. I am asking you because you knelt in the mud for a boy who had nothing to give you, and because my son has started uncrossing his arms when you enter a room, and because I have not, in 2 years, wanted anything the way I have wanted to hear you say something plain to me, and mean every word of it. You have been saying plain things to me since the first day I stood in your doorway with a false name in my mouth. I do not want a woman fit for a duke. I want you. You are still a duke," she said again, but softer this time, less an objection than a fact laid down between them to be looked at honestly. "I am. And you will be a duchess, if you say yes, and I will not pretend that changes nothing, or that Cornelia and women like her will not say cruel things about a fence-mender's daughter in fine rooms for the rest of both our lives." He took a step closer, slow, giving her every chance to step back, which she did not. "But I would rather have your no, given honestly, than a yes given because you believe a duke's asking cannot be refused. I am asking you to choose me, not because it is sensible, not because the children love you already, though they do. Choose me because you want to, or do not choose me at all." The rook called again outside, once, and fell silent. She looked at him a long moment in the low firelight. This grave. Careful man who had watched her from a hedge in the frost and told no one, who had mended a boy's whole life without ever putting his name to it, who stood now with his hat forgotten on the table and his heart plainly in his open hands. "Yes," she said. "It is the only word I need." He did not seize her hand. He asked, quietly, if he might, and when she held it out to him, he drew the worn glove from her fingers himself, slowly, finger by finger, the wool rough and much mended, until her bare hand lay in his, red-knuckled, work-scarred, steady now, entirely steady, and he bent his head and kissed the back of it. Once, gently, the way a man kisses a thing he has waited a long time to be permitted to touch. "I will not lie to you again," he said against her knuckles. "Whatever else I fail at, I will not fail at that." "See that you don't," she said, and for the first time since he had known her, plain, careful, unhurried Iris Bellamy laughed, a real laugh, startled out of her, and he found, to his own considerable surprise, that he was laughing too, both of them standing in a cold cottage, with one small fire between them, laughing like people who had been given back something they had stopped expecting to have again. The wedding, when it came in the early spring, was a small thing by the standards of a duke's house, held in the village church rather than the grand chapel at the hall, because Iris asked for that, and Alden, true to his word, refused her nothing that was hers to ask. Mrs. Pruitt cried through the whole of it, and denied it fiercely after. Rowan stood at his father's side gravely, in a coat he had chosen himself, and Clara scattered flower petals with more enthusiasm than accuracy, and Tam, scrubbed and fed and apprenticed now to the estate's headgroom, stood at the back of the church in a coat that fit him, and did not think, until much later, to wonder whether it was the same coat he had first been given, mended and let out twice over to grow with him. It was. Lady Cornelia did not attend. She sent a letter instead, brief and cold, which Alden read once, and burned unread by anyone else, and which was, as it turned out, the last correspondence the family kept with her for some years, until a much shorter, much humbler letter arrived from Bath the following winter, and was answered, eventually, with the particular grudging warmth of people who have decided that forgiveness, however hard won, costs less in the end than the alternative. A year later, almost to the week, the fire in the small library at Calder Hall burned the way it always burned now, high and steady, because Iris had never lost the habit of tending things properly, whether they were fences or hearths, or the small quiet grief that still visited Alden sometimes on the anniversary of his first wife's death, and which Iris had learned to sit beside without trying to mend it, because some things, she had come to understand, are not meant to be mended, only accompanied. Rowan was 8 now, and read to his sister most evenings without being asked, in a voice that had begun, unmistakably, to sound like his father's. Clara was 5, and no longer asked, when she woke, whether Iris would be there, because she had stopped believing there was any other possibility. Tam came up from the stable yard most Sundays for his supper in the kitchen, taller every visit, and told Mrs. Pruitt, with the particular seriousness of a boy who has decided to become a man of consequence, that he meant to be headgroom himself one day, and Mrs. Pruitt told him she did not doubt it for a moment. On the anniversary evening, Alden found Iris in the small library where he had once asked her a question he had not been certain of, sitting by the fire with her mending in her lap, though she mended far less now than she once had, out of necessity or otherwise. He sat beside her, and took her bare hand in his, and she let him, and neither of them spoke for a while, because there was nothing that needed saying that the fire and the quiet were not already saying for them. "I still have the coat," she said eventually, not looking up from the fire. "The one I gave Tam. He gave it back to me last spring, said it was too small, and I could not bring myself to sell it, or give it away again." "Keep it," Alden said. "Some things are worth keeping past their use." Their hands stayed clasped a long while after that, by the fire, in the warm room, and did not let go. A fence mended does not announce itself. It only stands, quietly, holding what it was built to hold, and asks no one to notice. If this story found something in you, some belief you carry that the small kindness done when no one is watching is the truest measure of a person, I hope you will stay close and subscribe to the channel so these stories can keep finding their way to you. I would love to know, in the comments, what you think Iris felt in that first moment she realised the quiet land agent and the grieving Duke were the same man. Was it anger first, or something gentler underneath it? Tell me your own answer. Thank you for staying with Iris and her Duke all the way to the fireside, and I will see you very soon with another story about a heart proven true when it believed itself entirely alone.